Tonight, Ukraine's president warning of a, quote, humanitarian catastrophe if NATO does not close the airspace over Ukraine. The growing calls after Russian airstrikes hit a children's hospital and maternity ward. Patients, including pregnant women, rushed out. Ukraine also sounding the alarm after the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was disconnected from the power grid. Could Europe face another nuclear disaster? Plus, Vice President Kamala Harris touching down in Poland following major confusion over a delivery of fighter jets to Ukraine. Impacts of the crisis felt here at home. Gas prices rising again, now up more than $2 a gallon from this time a year ago. President Biden placing the blame on Vladimir Putin as several governors call for a suspension of the gas tax. And those surging prices expected to trickle down past the pump. Also tonight, the woman charged in the U.S. accused of being a Russian spy. The FBI says she met with American politicians and even requested a sit-down with former President Trump during his first presidential run. Her alleged ties to Putin. Excessive force, the disturbing video appearing to show school staffers kneeling on students in two separate incidents. One girl, just 12 years old, her neck pinned down by an off-duty Kenosha officer. The investigations just launched. Plus, the shocking video showing an SUV plowing through a man as he left a convenience store, what authorities say caused the dangerous crash. And preemies rescued. The newborn twins evacuated from war-torn Ukraine and now on their way to the U.S. Their incredible journey and the brave team who got them out. Top story starts right now. Good evening, I'm Gabe Gutierrez in for Tom. We begin Top Story tonight with the war in Ukraine. Russia stepping up attacks on civilian areas as it tries to take control of the country. The horrifying images of pregnant women being rushed out of a children's hospital and maternity ward in Mariupol after it was hit with a Russian airstrike. Children reportedly trapped. Russian forces now blocking hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians from leaving that city, now in ruins. There's also concern over the Chernobyl power plant, the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Ukrainian officials say it has lost power, but experts say there is now imminent risk. And late today, Vice President Kamala Harris touching down in Warsaw, Poland, where she'll meet with Poland's president. Her visit comes amid confusion over a fighter jet delivery to Ukraine as President Zelenskyy urges the West for air defense help. Let's get right to Richard Engel in Ukraine again for us tonight.
Vladimir Putin says Russians should be proud of what their soldiers are doing in Ukraine. But where's the honor in bombing a children's and maternity hospital in a city that's surrounded? No patients were reported killed in this attack, but pregnant women were among those who were helped out of the building. Ukraine called it a war crime and says children are still trapped.
I cannot realize why it's necessary for Russian troops to destroy hospital.
Russia denied it was responsible. The Russian forces have been cutting off Mariupol for days. The city has run out of basic supplies. We don't have electricity, we don't have anything to eat, we don't have medicine, we have nothing, this woman says. At an urgent care hospital in Kiev, medical officials accused Russia of deliberately targeting civilians across the country. In every room, we saw civilians. This man having a bullet removed from his leg. In an adjacent room, a man with a brain injury. He'd been under his bombed home for 2 days before being dug out.
How are you in the medical community handling this war?
There is a kind of duty. We have to because we are doctors.
This family was escaping a suburb north of Kiev. After Russian troops bombed their house, the family hit the road and was quickly stopped by Russian soldiers who waved them on. But as soon as their car started moving, another group of Russian troops sprayed the car with bullets. 16-year-old Katerina was shot in the back. She collapsed unconscious on top of her 8-year-old brother, saving him.
I remember that we were driving, and the first thing I saw was my knee that was shot through to the bone. And after that, I think I fainted.
Her mother, Tatiana, was hit by 12 bullets down her legs while she was pleading with the Russians to stop shooting.
We started shouting, "Stop! There are children here, stop!" But they didn't stop. and kept shooting. 3 or 4 people were shooting, just as close as you are sitting right now.
Her husband feels guilt for not having left sooner. But Russian media are not showing these images. Instead, Russian TV described the special military operation as a heroic struggle against Nazis. Back in Mariupol, the crater next to the hospital gives an idea of the sheer size of the bomb, dropped in the center of the city. Bodies here are being laid to rest in mass graves, hearkening back to wars Europe thought were consigned to the past.
Ukraine is also sounding the alarm after Russian forces cut the power to the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site, disrupting cooling and monitoring systems. U.S. officials and the IAEA say there's no immediate risk of a radiation leak.
Richard Engel for us in Kyiv tonight. Richard, thank you. For more on the situation Richard just mentioned at the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site, let's bring in Council on Strategic Risk Senior Fellow Andrew Weber. He was also former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear, Chemical, and Biological Defense Programs under President Obama. Mr. Weber, thank you so much for joining Top Story once again. So how much of a threat is the current situation in Chernobyl for Ukrainians?
Well, it's not a major threat in terms of a radiation release, but it shows the reckless behavior of the Russian military. I'm much more concerned about the operational nuclear reactors that were taken last week by the Russian military, because what you have is basically a situation where the trained staff who have to operate these facilities safely are doing it at gunpoint.
And I want to ask you about what you think the international community should do to respond to this. The International Atomic Energy Agency tweeted out that this violates key safety pillar in ensuring uninterrupted power supply, according to that tweet. Is there anything else other countries can do to make up for this loss of power?
No, unfortunately not. I think the United Nations has to get involved. The Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, visit the site and ensure that everything is under control and that it's being operated safely. But again, if the Russian military continues to attack operational nuclear reactors as it has in Ukraine, that is a significant.
Yeah, certainly very concerning. So what do you think will happen if the Russians won't allow this site to be hooked back up or just can't be done? What alternatives do they have?
Well, at this site, the risks are low because the last operational reactor was shut down in 2000. But at the other sites, they're operating today, and the risk of a meltdown would be severe if power were lost for an extended period of time.
Mr. Weber, thank you so much for joining Top Story once again. Thank you. In Western Ukraine, people are watching the destruction of cities on the other side of the country with dread, but also with bold determination, as NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt witnessed firsthand.
They are preparing to defend their country, one block at a time. This barricaded checkpoint being erected in a Lviv suburb, not by soldiers or police, but by civilian residents.
We joined to defend our city because we don't want Russian troops to come here. We need to defend our families, our women's children. We are not here militaries, we are civilians. We're doing everything how we know it, how we can.
Bohdan Shutka and his neighbors are stacking sandbags. Cement walls and steel barriers are also part of layered defenses to guard against Vladimir Putin's army and protect not just their homes, but homeland too.
Do you think it's the duty of every Ukrainian to fight or to support the war?
Checkpoints like this are being built with great urgency because there is full expectation the war will eventually come to this part of Ukraine. The question is, how soon? Those Molotov cocktails, improvised bombs we saw citizens making at the start of the war, now close at hand. Nobody here knows what battle on these streets would really look like, or what might precede it.
Are you worried about Russian saboteurs and spies?
Yes, of course.
As we shoot, we're startled by the sudden sound of an attack jet. A Ukrainian plane racing from the camera's view. Ukraine's Air Force still in the fight, and so are the Ukrainian people.
Does this send a message to the Russians about the willingness of people here to fight and defend their homes?
For Russians, I can tell just one.
His answer, in Russian, a profane rallying cry among defiant Ukrainians, telling Mr. Putin what he can do.
Lester Holt joins us now from Lviv. Lester, you have covered so many conflicts over the last few decades. What's striking you most now that you're on the ground? You've been there for several days. What's striking you most about the mood of the Ukrainians you spoke with?
It is such a mood of pride. We were driving through a suburb of Lviv, and we've seen so many of these checkpoints, but this one was under construction. We pulled over and started talking to them, and there's this pride and this gleeful defiance. I think it's probably the best way to describe it, the sense that their military will prevail against the Russians, and then if it comes to street fighting here, that they will beat them.
You know, I was struck by the end of your piece there and their message to Vladimir Putin. But, you know, something that has really, been seen around the world and really amazed so much of us here at home is that, this idea that they are willing to lay down their lives for their country. Have you been seeing that there? And, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's the case of against a sense of pride, and that I think what the whole world is seeing here, you just can't go in and take another country, and they can't even imagine living under Russian rule. And so to a person, they say, and of course we never know until we're tested, but that they would give their lives for their country. The pride is enormous.
Lester Holt, live for us in Lviv, Ukraine. Lester, thank you so much for being there. And as more Ukrainians join the defense effort, some former ballet dancers are now taking up arms and working as paramedics on the front lines. Aaron McLaughlin has their stories.
They're the Butterflies of Kyiv, performing for the final time in France. Back home, their country torn apart by war. Now some of Ukraine's premier ballet dancers have swapped their tutus and slippers for guns and fatigues, putting their life's work on hold to defend their country. Of course I'm scared, says artist Alexei Potyomkin. I'm not a military person, but I couldn't just sit on the sidelines and observe. Just days ago, Alexei was a principal dancer in his prime, now a military paramedic. His life as an artist, a distant memory. I don't even think about ballet anymore, he says. Now it seems like another life. Dancer Lesia Vorotnyuk says art has prepared her for war. Ballet teaches you to have a strong spirit, she says. In 2019, Lesia says her husband died fighting on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. She says she's armed herself to protect her son and country. I love to perform on stage, to travel, to come back to ballet, she says. But the most important thing now is for the war to end with our victory. Across Ukraine, opera houses and theaters are closed.
Now it's not time for performance on a stage. Now we have performance on our street. We have blood, we have bombing.
The last time Oleksandr Omelshenko danced, it was the night before the war began. Now he's building anti-tank hedgehogs.
Do you think you're going to dance again?
Yeah, 100% I go back again.
Tonight, the artistic soul of Ukraine is standing by until they've secured their freedom. Aaron McLaughlin, NBC News, Lviv, Ukraine.
As Russia intensifies its attacks on Ukraine, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Poland tonight. The trip comes after the U.S. rejected the country's offer to send MiG fighter jets to Germany, a proposal that the Pentagon said wasn't tenable. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander joins us now. And Peter, this trip was planned before Poland announced its offer yesterday, which apparently caught the U.S. off guard. What more do we know about that, and how does it complicate the vice president's visit?
Yeah, Gabe, good evening. So the vice president, as you noted, she did arrive in Poland late tonight. It was expected, this trip, to give her a chance really to speak directly with Polish leaders about this issue of a fighter jet transfer to Ukraine. But as you noted, U.S. officials, they basically shut the door on that idea today. The Pentagon saying the U.S. does not support a transfer of jets right now, especially as was proposed by the Poles that they would go through U.S. custody. The U.S. warning that that would be viewed as a high-risk operation. It could be viewed by Vladimir Putin as an escalatory move. So now, with that as the backdrop, it certainly raises the stakes for the vice president's visit. Expect Harris to reiterate that the U.S. stands side by side with its NATO allies. She goes to Poland and then to Romania later this week. And she's going to emphasize the U.S.'s continued support for the Ukrainian people, both with humanitarian and military aid. And Gabe, notably, she's also going to meet with the Polish president and with refugees who have fled the violence in Ukraine to hear their gripping and heartbreaking stories firsthand.
Well, Peter, speaking about that aid to Ukraine, given that the Biden administration views getting those jets to Ukraine as a high risk, are there any other plans, though, to get Ukrainian fighters more weapons specifically or to further help Ukraine? Today, President Zelenskyy made a public plea saying, send us planes.
Yeah, it doesn't look like planes, as evidenced by the Pentagon statements today, are coming, at least not anytime soon. But the White House does say that more military aid will be on its way. The House is expected to vote tonight on a government funding package that includes nearly $14 billion in aid for Ukraine. It's economic, humanitarian, military assistance. The number is roughly $3.5 billion of it to refill equipment sent to Ukraine. That would likely include more anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapons, which the Ukrainian soldiers have used effectively, according to all top officials here, to help slow the Russian advance. President Biden, by the way, he had initially asked Congress for $6 billion, but as evidence of the bipartisan support for aiding Ukraine, that number quickly swelled.
For more on the crisis in Ukraine, we want to bring in now Ambassador Bill Taylor. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and the current vice president for Russia and Europe at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining Top Story once again. Now, we keep saying that this war is escalating every day, but the images of people escaping that hospital in Mariupol are just devastating. Have we entered a new stage in this war?
So, Gabe, the Ukrainians are still in the fight. And here we are 14 days in, and they have effectively fought the Russians out that outnumber the Ukrainians 10-1. The Ukrainians have stopped them on their advances. The Russians have clearly made some progress in the south, but their main goal, Putin's main goal, is clearly Kyiv, and he's failing at that. He's failing first because the Ukrainian military is fighting hard. Second, because the Ukrainian people are supporting their military, are supporting their president, are supporting the concept, the notion, the idea of freedom, of defending their own land, as you have just described. But third, the Russian military is performing badly. They were ill-prepared. The soldiers were ill-prepared. The logistics were not there. They didn't have enough food and fuel, and they're stuck. And so this phase is a long phase that continues even as we go today, Dave.
So, Ambassador, you're saying basically the Putin playbook is if the military is frustrated, then essentially the next step is to flat out target civilians.
That appears to be it. That appears to be it. He doesn't have support from all of his people in Russia. I mean, your report there on the McDonald's was very, very illuminating. People are starting to figure out, Russian people are starting to figure out that the war that President Putin is waging against their neighbor in Ukraine, the Russians don't have anything against Ukrainians. That war is affecting them. It's also affecting them as their sons and daughters and fathers and brothers come back for burial. This is not going well for President Putin. And the question is, what is his response? You're exactly right. Some worry that he could lash out. Some think that he might be able to take another look, that people may get to him and have him take a look at other ways out. There are a lot of people trying to work on getting to him. Senior people in various governments are trying to get to him. So a lot is going on at this point. He's failing, and he's looking for another way.
So, Ambassador, I want to turn back to those fighter jets, right? So with NATO countries essentially playing hot potato with those fighter jets, not wanting to be the one to hand them over, have we reached the furthest point that the West is willing to go here?
I don't think so, Gabe. I don't think so. I think we are, as again, your reporter just said, President Putin and his government have said already that this is war. This is economic war. We are taking some steps that are risky. We've been providing weapons to the Ukrainians for years, and we've accelerated right now. We've accelerated that delivery. That's not much different from providing the kinds of weapons that we're talking about here. So these jets that are ready to go, if we can just get them across the line, the Ukrainian pilots know how to fly these jets. And that can be something that really deals with the Air Force and the air attacks and the bombing of the hospitals that you just talked about and civilian targets. So no, we've not reached the limit. One other thing, by the way, the concern, President Zelensky's strong concern about air and air defense, and the jets and things that we've talked about, the no-fly zones that we've talked about, that has prompted other looks, other ways to deal with that problem. The Brits have just come up and suggested they've got a mobile anti-aircraft air defense system that is ready to go, that is ready to be provided. So that's the kind of thing that can respond to President Zelensky's requests.
Well, an official from the Biden administration told NBC News that the U.S. is now worried that Russia could use chemical weapons in Ukraine. That's been a fear for a while, but you know that the worry is that Russia could then be planning a false flag operation to justify it. If that were to happen, how should the U.S. respond? And would that be the line in the sand for more involvement, do you think?
So that would be a violation of all the treaties that we've all signed about the use of chemical weapons. We know the Russians have already violated those chemical weapon bans in Syria against their own people. They've tried to poison their own people. So we know that they've violated that, and they could well use them in Ukraine. You're right about the concern that they may deploy them and blame the Ukrainians. And that should be very clear. And if we've got evidence, if we've got intelligence, which we've used before, to highlight that, to expose that before it happens, that's one of the things that we should be doing.
Ambassador Taylor, thanks so much for joining Top Story once again. Now to those skyrocketing gas prices. As the crisis in Ukraine continues, another record-breaking day at the pump, reaching an average of $4.25 a gallon. What some governors are asking the federal government to do in response. National correspondent Miguel Almaguer has more.
As Americans feel the squeeze at gas stations across the country, the national average for a gallon of gas has never climbed faster, spiking another 8 cents overnight and surging 13 cents in California.
Usually I don't even look, and now it kind of blows my mind.
To put the new price for a gallon of gas into perspective, the average price today, a record $4.25, is approaching $2 more than a year ago. And even as soaring crude prices finally dipped Wednesday, there won't be immediate or perhaps any relief at the pump.
It's really just going to slow the increases as opposed to just looking at, outright cuts.
With President Biden blaming rising costs on Putin's price hike, the White House is trying to remind Americans who they say is responsible, believing most are willing to pay more for gas as war intensifies. It comes as 6 Democratic governors call for a suspension of the gas tax, which is 18 cents a gallon, as inflation, which started before the Ukraine conflict, hits a 40-year high. The pain at the pump will trickle down to sticker shock beyond gas stations.
Beyond filling your tank up, your next visit to the grocery store, the hardware store, your next flight are all going to have significantly impacted fuel prices.
And Miguel Almaguer joins us now from Los Angeles. So Miguel, I want to go back to that call from some Democratic governors to drop the federal gas tax. How likely is that to actually happen, and what else is the government doing to help?
Well, Gabe, there is a broader push from lawmakers across the country to temporarily suspend the national gas tax, but that would need to be passed by Congress, a process that's going to take time if it happens, so no immediate impact on the pump. On a global level, oil-producing countries are also trying to increase crude supplies, but that, too, isn't going to happen overnight. Gabe?
Miguel, thank you. Still ahead on Top Story tonight, the FBI charging a dual U.S.-Russian citizen with illegally acting as a Russian agent. How she hid in plain sight, and how far her connections here went. Plus, a dramatic crash in Florida, injuring a man, while the 21-year-old driver says she ended up smashing into a store. And viral videos from 2 separate schools appearing to show staff putting their knees on students' necks. How their families are responding tonight. Next. We're back now with that alleged Russian spy plot. The FBI charging a dual Russian-American citizen with acting as a Russian agent in the U.S. Her connections reaching all the way to President Vladimir Putin. The former banker allegedly meeting with U.S. politicians and lobbyists, and one person she tried to connect with, then presidential candidate Donald Trump. NBC News chief investigative correspondent Tom Winter has the details.
Tonight, the FBI says Russia had an agent hiding in plain sight, meeting with politicians, lobbyists, and trying to court a presidential candidate. They say 61-year-old Elena Bronson, a citizen of both Russia and the U.S., worked to spread Russian interests, allegedly receiving tens of thousands of dollars directly from the Russian government while hiding her Moscow directives in violation of U.S. law. Bronson, a former banker, allegedly peddled Russian propaganda through the Russian Center New York, an initiative she ran out of her Manhattan home. Her connections reaching all the way to the top. According to the FBI, Bronson communicated directly with Russian President Vladimir Putin, requesting, quote, administrative support to host events at the Russian consulate and embassy. Bronson attempted to cozy up to a presidential candidate, requesting meetings at pro-Russian events in New York City with Donald Trump or his family in 2016 while he ran for office. The FBI says there's no indication Trump ever attended any of Bronson's events. Authorities say Bronson fled the U.S. in October of 2020, less than a month after she was interviewed by the FBI. Her exact whereabouts, unknown. In this interview with Russian state TV released in October, Bronson says she returned to Moscow because she was, quote, scared and felt the probability was very high that she'd be arrested. The woman conducting that interview, Maria Butina, who in 2018 pled guilty to acting as a Russian agent without registering with the feds herself. She admitted to using the NRA to gain access to influential Republican politicians.
I'm the board member of the Right to Bear Arms. This is an all-Russian public organization. We promote gun rights.
After serving more than a year in an American prison, Butina was sent back to Russia. The likelihood that Bronson, who left the U.S. before charges were levied against her, could see any prison time is extremely low, though her case could serve as a deterrent.
This is a common practice of the Russians and Soviets before them, and it's going to continue. And so it's really incumbent upon us to, kind of identify it, but also for the public to kind of be aware of it, that this is constantly going on, and to be particularly sort of tuned into it now, where there is sort of, there's an ongoing proxy war between the United States and Russia.
And Tom Winter joins Top Story right now in studio. So, Tom, as you mentioned in your report, the chances of Bronson seeing any jail time are extremely low. So why bring this case up now? What do you make of the timing of all this?
Well, I think there's two things. One, the deterrence factor that we talked about, but also the second thing is relationships, as we are well aware, are not particularly great between Russia and the U.S. But there appears to be a lot of counterintelligence activity in the New York area. We saw a number of diplomats assigned to Russia's mission at the UN recently get tossed from the country. It was kind of under the surface, but that was not a direct result of the invasion in Ukraine. That had been a long-running counterintelligence effort here in New York City. We've seen other actions recently with a TV director who went and tried to help a Russian oligarch start a TV network. There's a lot of law enforcement activity in this area, and I think chances are probably pretty good, Gabe. We're going to see more of it in the weeks and months to come.
Tom Winter, thank you. Moving now to disturbing scenes in two separate schools. Video appearing to capture school staffers pinning down students with their knee. In one case, on a girl's neck. NBC's Priscilla Thompson has the details, and we want to warn you, these videos may be hard to watch.
Tonight, disturbing videos showing school staff appearing to pin students down with a knee in two separate altercations that took place hundreds of miles apart. A 14-year-old Florida student shouted that at one point in a roughly minute-and-a-half long clip that has now gone viral. The adult male, a staff member at Horace Mann Middle School outside Miami, appears to place his knee on the student multiple times throughout the ordeal, seemingly in an effort to get the student's hoodie off.
Does this look like any protocol you've ever seen?
Absolutely not. Certainly
a hoodie being worn in violation of a school rule should not require the use of force.
We don't know what happened before what's caught on camera. Miami-Dade County Public Schools tells NBC News in a statement, the behavior portrayed in this video is difficult to watch and runs contrary to the comportment that is expected of all Miami-Dade County Public School employees. They say the staff member has been removed from the school, pending the outcome of an investigation. This video going viral just days after a similar incident in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Video appears to show a school staff member there placing his knee on the neck of a 12-year-old girl while breaking up a lunchtime fight at Lincoln Middle School. How is the student doing?
She's not doing well.
The attorney for the girl says she's traumatized by the incident and that her head and neck were injured.
Her father was upset, angry, felt helpless, to see that happen to his daughter.
That staff member now identified as a 37-year-old off-duty police officer with 4 years on the force, according to the Kenosha police. The department says he worked for the school district on his days off. The district says he is now on paid leave while they investigate. The videos have prompted outrage, with some drawing comparisons to the 2020 murder of George Floyd, caused by a Minneapolis police officer who placed a knee on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Similarities the Kenosha Police Department has acknowledged, writing in a Facebook post, "We are keenly aware of the significant sensitivity surrounding the photo." The department says they and the school district are investigating the incident in its entirety and, quote, being cautious not to make conclusions based off of a small piece of information shared on social media.
They're kids. That's why the school employs adults to be in the room. And regardless of the circumstances that led to this incident, an adult used a banned chokehold.
Joins us now here in studio. Priscilla, what more do we know about this training for the officer and the school staff member? How are they trained to handle students in these altercations?
So we reached out to both school districts on that question. Kenosha Unified School District did not respond to our question specifically, and Miami-Dade County Schools referred us to their student conduct manual, which doesn't mention anything about staff training or behavior. I did speak with a school discipline expert about this, though, and he says that teachers and staff are rarely trained for how to handle these situations, and when they are, it's not simulated under pressure in a classroom or a hallway full of children who are screaming and recording. And so it makes it very difficult to determine what they're going to do in these situations. And so that training is very important, that school discipline expert tells me, especially with students returning to the classroom after the pandemic, which we know has sort of exacerbated these emotional and mental health challenges for both kids and adults.
Priscilla Thompson, thanks so much for joining us. After the break, a grim search in Denver. Police now asking for the public's help in finding a box of human heads. Our authorities say they were stolen. Stay with us. Now to Top Stories news feed, and we begin with dramatic video out of Florida. We should warn you, it might be hard to watch. Surveillance video capturing the moment a car smashed through the front of a convenience store, hitting a man as he was leaving. Police say the victim was alert following the crash, and he's expected to make a full recovery. The 21-year-old driver told police she mistook the gas pedal for the brake when she was trying to park. Next, Denver police investigating a strange case and asking the public for help. They're looking for a stolen box containing human heads meant for medical research. Officials say someone broke into a parked freight company truck last week and took the box labeled exempt human specimen. So far, no arrests have been made. Philadelphia's police commissioner says an officer who shot and killed a 12-year-old last week will be fired. The commissioner says the unidentified officer violated the department's policy when he shot Thomas Siderio as he ran away last week. Police say the boy shot at an unmarked police car with 4 plainclothes officers inside. The district attorney's office is investigating. And authorities in Southern California chasing a runaway cow today. The cow ending up in this parking lot north of Los Angeles after navigating a freeway and city streets. It ran down a road before heading into what looks like a ranch and was eventually put in an enclosure there. It's not clear how the animal got loose in the first place. Now to Michigan, where the federal trial of 4 men accused of plotting to abduct Governor Gretchen Whitmer is underway. In opening statements, prosecutors say the men schemed to kidnap and kill her over COVID-19 restrictions. For more on the trial, here's Pete Williams.
At the height of the COVID pandemic and government restrictions, prosecutors say 6 men upset by those rules plotted to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan from her summer home and blow up the bridge leading to it so police would have a hard time responding. 4 of those men are now on trial. 2 of them, Adam Fox and Barry Croft, are accused of being the masterminds meeting in the basement of a vacuum cleaner store where Fox worked to discuss the plot. Court documents say the group was closely monitored by 2 undercover FBI agents and at least 5 informants, and that some of them watched the men set off explosives, surveil the governor's summer home, and conduct exercises to practice using weapons. But defense lawyers say all those undercover agents and informants egged the men on, pushing them deeper into the plot. They also contend that the men cannot be found guilty of conspiring with government informants, but a former prosecutor disagrees.
In this case, there are 4 defendants on trial for entering into an agreement to commit a crime. The mere fact that there were government agents that were also pretending to go along doesn't in any way diminish that conspiracy.
And Pete Williams joins us now from our Washington newsroom. So, Pete, what evidence does the government have that the jury is going to hear in the coming days?
Well, there's lots of evidence in this case because these people were so closely monitored by federal undercover agents and informants. So there's video of what they met and talked about. There's audio. There's video of them going on these training missions to practice shooting their weapons. There's video of them practicing to blow explosives up, video of them surveilling the governor's summer home. So there's lots of evidence in this case that the government has gathered.
Certainly much more to come in this trial, Pete. So the defense is essentially accusing the FBI of entrapment here. How's the government responding to that?
Well, yes, and that's because there were all these informants and 7 people total, informants and undercover agents. And what the defense says is that they were the ones who pushed these 4 people into doing what they did. But a very strong tool that the government will have in its case is that there were 2 other people originally, 2 other men originally arrested in this case. They have since pleaded guilty, and the government says they will testify that this was not the government egging the men on, that this was their idea, the idea of the defendants, Gabe.
Pete, thank you. We take you overseas now to London, where a judge has formally dismissed Prince Andrew's sex abuse case. The prince agreeing to pay a settlement to his longtime accuser. NBC's Kathy Park is there.
Just weeks after a dramatic announcement on a settlement, Prince Andrew's legal battle against his accuser, Virginia Giuffre, has officially come to an end. A judge formally dismissing the lawsuit Tuesday, which accused Andrew of sexually abusing Giuffre when she was 17. Her lawyer confirming to NBC News that the prince has now paid Giuffre an undisclosed amount to settle the case, saying in a statement, "This is an important step, but it should not be the last step in holding Jeffrey Epstein's enablers and participants to account." Giuffre had long alleged she was forced to have sex with Andrew 3 times back in 2001, when she says she was trafficked by his friend, disgraced billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, and his now convicted confidant, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine woke me up in the morning and said, "You're going to meet a prince today." I didn't know at that point that I was going to be trafficked to that prince.
Prince Andrew repeatedly denied Giuffre's allegations, telling the BBC that he had no memory of this now infamous photo.
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
With pressure mounting, the Queen took swift action, stripping the 62-year-old of his military and royal titles earlier this year. Buckingham Palace saying in a statement at the time that the prince would be defending this case as a private citizen. Then, just last month, after Prince Andrew's failed attempts to get the suit dismissed, the 2 parties agreed to settle. Though he didn't admit to any personal wrongdoing, Andrew said in a joint letter to the court that he regretted his association with Epstein. The prince also pledging to make a substantial donation to Giuffre's charity, which helps survivors of sex trafficking. For Giuffre, the settlement is another step toward justice. For years now, Virginia Giuffre has accused Prince Andrew of sexual abuse. He has always denied those allegations. And while he may have avoided this long, drawn-out trial because of the settlement, his reputation has already taken a hit.
Kathy, we thank you. Turning now to the Americas. A look at stories coming out of the U.S. and across Latin America. Tonight, 2 American prisoners held in Venezuela are free only days after a U.S. delegation made a rare trip to the country. But as oil prices skyrocket, the timing is raising some eyebrows. Tonight, 2 Americans detained in Venezuela are home in the U.S. after a high-stakes meeting in Caracas.
They've been wrongfully detained.
Among those released, Gustavo Cardenas, one of the Citgo 6 executives from Citgo Petroleum who were arrested during a business trip to Venezuela in November of 2017 and later charged with corruption. Their families have been pleading for their release for years.
This is horrible to us.
We spoke to them in 2019.
Life for us is like a war because every day is a battle to bring them back.
Today, Maria Elena Cardenas told NBC News of her husband's homecoming, "We are so happy. It doesn't seem real." The other man released is Jorge Alberto Fernandez, a Cuban-American tourist who was arrested last year for bringing a drone into Venezuela and accused of terrorism. A source within the Venezuelan government called the release a good faith gesture by President Nicolas Maduro. It's a rare thaw in relations now that the U.S. is no longer getting oil from Russia.
We have an interest globally in maintaining a steady supply of energy, including through our diplomatic efforts.
But critics argue the U.S. should not be cozying up to a dictator like Maduro.
He uses negotiations the way Putin does, habitually, to divide and demoralize his opposition.
And technically, the U.S. still recognizes Maduro's opponent as the legitimate leader of Venezuela. Tonight, no word on the status of the other detained Americans. Now to top stories Global Watch and violence at a Women's Day rally in Sudan. Video shows demonstrators hit with tear gas as they marched towards the presidential palace in the country's capital. Women's rights groups put the protests together with neighborhood resistance committees. They've been demonstrating since the military took power in October. Lawmakers in Guatemala increasing prison sentences for women who have abortions. Police stood guard outside Congress as the new law passed late Tuesday night. Women now face up to 10 years in prison for the procedure, up from 3. The law also explicitly bans same-sex marriage, which was essentially already illegal in the country. But the bill also prohibits schools from teaching anything about sexual diversity. Turning back to Ukraine, where millions of refugees are fleeing war-torn cities. Outside of Kyiv, the most vulnerable are trying to escape any way they can, even crossing bombed bridges. Sky News special correspondent Alex Crawford has that report.
It's the only way out of Irpin, and this would test even the fit and healthy. But those still fleeing are the most vulnerable, the elderly, the frail and the very young. Those who've left this dangerous journey to the last, and they're having to pick their way across. Those unable to get over themselves have to be carried, painfully slowly so they don't slip, despite the desperation to get to the other side. The man in red is offering some comfort to the old man as he puts all his trust in strangers taking enormous risks themselves.
This is an absolutely incredible scene. There are dozens of people like this man who are having to be held and taken over a really precarious, rickety bridge, and do it slowly because you can't have too many people on that bridge at one time or else it will just snap, and they're trying to do this quickly before the firing starts again.
Some of these people have already walked several kilometres to get to this point, carrying on their backs the loved ones they could not leave behind. And this is no agreed safe corridor. These people know this route has been attacked multiple times already. No. So they raced out as quickly as they could, crying babies helped by volunteers.
Mom, yes.
Come on, Mum, he's calling. Many of them have been shot at or survived shelling. Smile, her partner says. He wants her to be brave in front of our cameras. The courage of these people in these, the most difficult and risky of circumstances, is quite astonishing. The pulling together of them all, an absolute inspiration to witness.
Here we have shoots all everywhere. We don't see anything, but we listen all
hear
night.
A lot of it.
Yes, and we know some streets kills people. Near my house kills women yesterday.
The Russian soldiers are very close, we're told, only 100 meters down the end of this road. The urgency to get people out is stepping up a beat. Ukrainian soldiers are pushing into Irpin, trying to hold back the Russian troops. They have to. About a third of the town is now under control of the Russians, putting them right on the western doorstep of the capital. The Ukrainians say they bombed the bridge, which used to be the main route into Kiev, and the Russians only have to cross this to easily get within striking distance of the capital. Those running away from this slow but relentless military advance told us of being under siege for days, surrounded by explosions until they could last no longer.
No light, no water, no everything, and we can't live in our houses right now.
The road out is littered with possessions they once thought essential. Now just surviving is the priority.
Sometimes we thought this is the last second of our life. It was very scared.
Yeah, I bet it was.
They're fighting the battle of their lives, but there's a sense they're only delaying the inevitable. They're preparing to lay mines to protect the capital road. And all the men escaping Irpin in the west have their documents checked. And they're tested on their Ukrainian. They're acutely aware here that Russian saboteurs might try to sneak into the capital, hiding amongst the terrified civilians. So while the Russians are still advancing, they take any window to get people out, any way they can. They've somehow survived the most atrocious conditions in a town under attack and under siege. But it's by no means over, and from somewhere they find the reserves to push through this terror. Because everyone here is horrified at the thought of suffering the same fate as other areas pulverized by the foreign troops moving in. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Irpin.
Coming up, a historic sunken ship found off the coast of Antarctica. How a team of adventurers located Endurance after a century deep under the sea. We'll be right back. Back now with a stunning discovery off the coast of Antarctica. Scientists found a historic sunken ship after more than a century. NBC's Ann Thompson has the story.
The ghostly Endurance, discovered in Antarctica's frigid waters nearly 2 miles deep.
When you saw the name Endurance, what went through your heart?
Oh, it was a jaw-dropping moment. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was stunned.
The ship crushed by sea ice and sunk in 1915. It is a symbol of Sir Ernest Shackleton's legendary leadership. All 28 men on board survived, camping on ice floes for 5 months, then escaping in small boats.
Ernest Shackleton is a hero. He rescued his men from almost certain death. He survived against all the odds, and he did so with compassion, leadership, bravery.
The search site in the Weddell Sea followed the ship captain's notes from when the Endurance sunk over 106 years ago. It took 34 dives by underwater robots in today's ice-clogged waters to find the ship.
It is in remarkably good condition.
That's right, it is, it is. Partly that's because of the very cold water that it sits in, which acts a bit like a refrigerator, so preserves everything on board.
Protected by an international treaty, the ship must not be disturbed. There, the Endurance will remain, a haunting testament to man's will to survive. Ann Thompson, NBC News.
And when we come back, preemie twins evacuated from Ukraine. A look at the dangerous mission to save them. We'll be right back. And finally, the brave mission to get a set of newborn twins home. Here's Jesse Kirsch.
For days, one American couple could only see their newborn twins through a camera. With war engulfing Ukraine, Lenny and Moisha Spector were born by surrogacy February 25th in Kyiv. They arrived early at just 32 and a half weeks, putting these preemie twins at even greater risk.
You know, if the hospital loses power, they're going to die.
Their American parents, Alex Spector and Irma Nunez, watched in anguish from the U.S., doing what they could by phone. But their babies needed much more than a train ticket.
It's kind of hard to see, but there they are. They're in there. The doctor's in there.
That's when Brian Stern and Project Dynamo stepped in, assembling a team of doctors, neonatologists, and ambulance drivers for what Stern says was nearly a real-life mission impossible.
We've evacuated and rescued literally thousands of people by now between Afghanistan and Ukraine. And this is by far the most complex and sensitive operation that we've ever done.
But Stern's team remarkably found a way. Project Dynamo's co-founder says his team was able to get the Spectre twins and a third baby out of Kyiv, hearing and feeling artillery as the caravan fled.
We're crammed in here like sardines. We're running for the border to Poland.
The rescue team documenting its westward escape, passing this massive checkpoint line on the way to Poland, where Lenny and Moisha's dad, Alex, was waiting.
It was dangerous, exciting, scary, hopeful.
And finally relieving Monday as the boys arrived safely at a Polish hospital where they're getting stronger.
You know, I think the most incredible thing about this is seeing them alive and seeing how tiny and precious these little babies are.
Tonight, Alex Spector finally able to do something so simple. Reach out and embrace his baby boys. Soon they'll meet Mom, too.
For us, it's the happiest story in the world.
After a real-life nightmare, this American family getting a fairy tale ending thanks to a small army, including the people of Ukraine.
These boys will be proud of the land in which they were born, that's for sure.
Jesse Kirsch, NBC News.
Incredible work. Project Dynamo says it plans to go back to Ukraine to rescue more children. For Tom Llamas, I'm Gabe Gutierrez in New York. Stay right there. More News Now is on the way.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.